About a week or so ago, I finished Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, which took one of my favorite games ever and just made it even better and more impressive than it already was. I played and loved every single FromSoft game they've made in the last decade plus, Dark Souls 2 to a lesser extent, but they basically can't miss in my eyes, and I'll continue to play and buy anything they put out going forward. So today, I want to talk a bit about what exactly I want next from them, and no, it's not Bloodborne 2. And look, I know Elden Ring just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, so I'm not trying to demand more content right now from them or anything, but experiencing Shadow of the Erdtree and seeing the build up to this DLC and having it hit so hard almost feels like a culmination to what has been building from FromSoft's Souls games for the last 15 years since Demon's Souls on the PS3. And Demon's Souls is actually a big part about what I want to talk about today. So right up front, as much as I love Elden Ring, I don't think I want the next FromSoft game to be a big, huge open world like it was. I loved exploring the lands between and feeling the sense of discovery that a big fleshed out world allowed, but the highlights of that game for me were always the legacy dungeons. The tight, handcrafted levels that fold into themselves, that are so smart and well designed, full of secret bosses, weapons, and make me feel like that sense of accomplishment for finding all of it. So I think what I actually really want FromSoft to make next is a sort of spiritual successor to Demon's Souls. So what exactly do I mean by that? Do I want a game called Demon's Souls 2? No, not necessarily. What I really want is a game with the structure of Demon's Souls, with a central hub allowing players to go to different themed levels in any order, but made with the 15 plus years of experience that FromSoft has making these games since that game first released. It also feels like a natural step back in scope after the massive endeavor creating Elden Ring surely was, and I like the idea of a smaller scope project coming for the next big, massive open world game that I'm sure will exist one day. I first played Demon's Souls back when it was re-released with the remake on the PS5, and I really enjoyed myself. I thought the freedom to go different levels as you saw fit really worked for me and my playstyle and helped keep the game fresh if I was ever getting stuck or bored of an area. The way the game scaled each level to start easy and get harder as you went deeper into that world also created a natural roadblock for me to try and go experience new areas rather than finishing each one linearly. Whereas in Elden Ring, with each new area, Limgrave, Liurnia, Caelid, etc., they almost bring their own new difficulty to the area, then it felt natural to stay in that area and finish it up before moving on to the next. I like the idea of hopping back and forth between levels and taking on the different kinds of enemies in each area, exploiting their weaknesses with new weapons and spells I found in a different area. The idea of getting items or equipment in one place that would be very helpful in another, that you were struggling in to make it easier, almost like getting a certain upgrade from beating bosses in old Mega Man games, figuring out where to go first and what order to tackle things in. Demon's Souls was FromSoftware's first crack at making a game in the Souls genre, a genre we've all grown to love and how other developers have taken inspiration from. I just know a modern day FromSoftware could make such a well thought out web of levels if they went back to the structure today. And I don't really want it to be a massive game either, just 5 or so levels like Demon's Souls, with 3 to 4 main bosses in each, but maybe this time around throw in some optional bosses that might drop some items or have boss weapons that could be useful in taking down other areas and make them easier. I also would love to see them take some inspirations in the boss design from Demon's Souls with some more gimmick bosses. Demon's Souls had too many bosses that had special mechanics or gimmicks in my opinion, but I feel like that was one thing that Elden Ring didn't have a whole lot of, so I think it'd be cool to have a little more of your standard boss fights that we all know and love, but then mix in a few more that require you to interact with differently with the boss and the boss room with, like Demon's Souls. Another cool side effect of this level-based structure would be an easier return to more traditional enemy invasions. I know there are still invasions in Elden Ring, but I think that only really happened when you were playing multiplayer. I don't really know how it worked when you're in the big open world either. I might be wrong on this, but either way, I don't remember being invaded a whole lot by real players when playing that game. And I like being invaded. It can be annoying, but it feels like an important ingredient to the From formula that I missed in Elden Ring. Now, Demon's Souls does have a couple of other quirks that I'd like to address, some good, some bad. The first thing's a pretty big one, but the soul form you get when you die, going down to 50% of your max HP, I think was a little harsh in Demon's Souls. Instead, I would like them just to lean more into what they did in Elden Ring with the Great Rune style, where instead of dying and having to be a lesser version of yourself unless you use an item, stick with being your standard self and using an item you can buff up until you die, kind of like Elden Ring. I also don't want them to have to farm for healing items. The grass system in Demon's Souls brought some cool options and resource management, but it was a little too rough early game in my opinion. Maybe having a flask that you always have when you respawn, but giving it less uses, to where you still need to farm up for items for healing, but never have to worry about going down to no healing available when you spawn. I just remember early in Demon Souls having to grind a lot for healing items. I just thought that was silly, but by endgame I had plenty of different options and they were plentiful and that was fun. Just to smooth out that line a little bit, and I think that'd be a good system. The last big thing about Demon Souls I want to talk about is the idea of the world tendency system. Basically, if you did certain things in the world, dying in soul form, killing bosses or NPCs, stuff like that, small things would change in a level, like a previously locked door being opened, a pile of rocks being removed, etc., etc. I like the system, but it, like many other things in the game, were a little too harsh and hard to understand and really get the full experience of unless you looked up a guide for how to get the right world tendency for NPC interactions and special items in each area. Instead, I think it'd be cool to have the player be a little more in control of things, like finding a key or an item in one area, and then at any point, thereafter, I could go and use that in another level where it's needed, rather than having to worry about balancing mechanic like world tendency and worry about messing it up. Just a little bit more freedom and making things a little easier to not miss. So yeah, those are my thoughts on where FromSoftware should go next. Just pull things back a little bit and take some inspiration from where they started. Thanks for watching. I'm sure whatever path that FromSoftware does decide to take following Shadow of the Erdtree, I'm going to be more than down with and chomping at the bit to try out. Just had some random thoughts I want to get into a video while they're still fresh. I'm sure things will change and I may feel differently several months from now. Who knows? Maybe another new developer inspired by FromSoftware will make a game like what I'm describing now and scratch that itch, and From can just work on making an even bigger, better masterpiece in Elden Ring. Impossible to say at this point. Either way, I'm excited to see what's next. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.